So I teach people who, don't reveal information about yourself. If you have an open house, remove things that could cause a skilled negotiator to analyze who you are and then who can capitalize on that.
This is Mitch, and welcome to the Real Estate Investor Summit podcast. I have a terrific guest today. Guys, sold over 50,000 programs in 31 countries, and you're going to love the topic today. We're talking on negotiating. Who doesn't need that? Doesn't matter what you're doing, we're always negotiating. We negotiate when we wake up in the morning till the time we go to sleep at night. Whether you know it or not, we're constantly negotiating. It'll never end. We will always be negotiating. And if you don't get good at it, you just kind of sit somewhere down at the bottom of the heap and never get what you're going after. So I'm excited to talk to Mike Shloopka today because negotiation is something I think we can always improve on. It's always nice to hear the pros talk about it. This guy is definitely a pro. He's been teaching it, talking about it for years and years and years. He's been on Forbes. I don't know, the list can go on forever. He's a nationally known speaker, been all over the world. Mike, how are you doing today?
Great, Mitch. Thanks for having me on the program.
Man, it is. I'm really excited about today's program because, like I said, we're always negotiating, aren't we?
Every day. I always say this to my listeners and to the attendees at my program. You're negotiating in your personal life, your social life, and especially in your business life. And as you stated at the introduction, from the moment we wake up in the morning to when we go to sleep at night, you're negotiating. And it's an essential life skill. And that's one of the things I try to stress with my audience. There's, some people, and your listeners will relate to this, some people have a natural feel for the process. Others don't have that natural feel, but it's a learned skill, Mitch. It's something that people can learn.
I'm going to tell you, I have not considered myself the greatest negotiator in the world. I mean, I must have something going. I have something going on because I'm able to close a certain amount of deals, and I make my fair share of, get my fair share of the good side of things. But I don't naturally think to negotiate. Like I went in the other day and bought a new rifle at the gun store, and I walked out kicking myself because by the time I got home, I realized I never asked for $1 off. And sometimes we get so used to or accustomed in this world that because it has a price tag on it, that's the price, which is wrong. If you can speak to anybody in control of anything, you may be able to get a price off. And even at Walmart, you can ask them, is there any discounts I can get? Sometimes they just throw you a discount, the $8 employee at the register, you know what I mean?
Well, Mitch, that's a great point. To formalize what you've just said, whether you're buying a home, whether you're buying something at retail, whether you're buying a specialty item, whenever you go into a store, a location, and even online now, when somebody gives you their price, we call it their opening negotiating position. And their opening negotiating position is their price. But that doesn't mean that there's not flexibility. So I would encourage all of your listeners to use one key question when they're negotiating and simply ask the other party involved in the negotiation this question: do you have any flexibility on price? And see what the other side says. Just learn. The people need to learn to ask great questions to determine if there's any flexibility. But the first obstacle people need to overcome is the fear of asking for something.
That's true. And you think, like I just said, even at Walmart, when you get up to the register, you assume that they have no authority.
Right. And then the other question I teach people to ask is if you're at a hotel room or a restaurant and you're disappointed in your room or you're disappointed in the service or something, the other question that I ask, let's use the Walmart as an example. If you went into Walmart and you saw something priced in a way that you thought there was some flexibility, simply ask the question, who has the authority? Who has the authority to discount pricing? And let somebody get a manager, an assistant manager, a floor manager, a store manager, anybody to be able to do that. So 2 questions your listeners need to get good at is, do you have any flexibility on pricing? And number 2, who has the authority to negotiate on price or value? And the other thing I would say on to use your firearm as an example is, let's say that firearms dealer or retailer didn't have any flexibility on the price of the firearm you bought, but you still wanted to believe you wanted to get something out of that transaction. So if the firearms dealer said to you, well, I have no flexibility on price, it is what it is, we're competitively priced, you can shop around, that's the best price you're going to find. And then, having listened to this program and had me as your guest, I would teach you to say, well, is there anything else that we could look at other than price? And you might have been able to do something on either ammunition or a gun case or something like that was over and above price. And if you work hard enough at it, you'll be able to get at a win-win outcome.
I bet you're really difficult to go out with. You're always asking for
somebody said that to me. They said, you must drive your wife nuts. What I tend to do, though, Mitch, is I tend to figure out when I don't negotiate all of the time. We teach a methodology where, yesterday I was negotiating with a credit card company and a U.S. currency credit card. In that scenario, I'll negotiate. But generally, if I'm traveling around the world, whether it be hotel rooms, airlines, the type of seat I sit in, I always do it in a non-confrontational manner, which is something else I want to stress to people, especially people from different geographies in North America. Some geographies and people that live in certain cities are a little bit aggressive, and being aggressive in a negotiation is not a good thing. So I tend to manage it very professionally, very calmly. I ask a lot of questions in order to frame the negotiation.
I have a friend of mine who's a really great negotiator. I learned how to buy houses from him, and I watched him negotiate for a long time, and it was amazing to me. He would actually, when he went in to negotiate for a house, would collect everything in the garage, and he'd collect all the appliances, and the washer and dryer, and the lawnmower, and the weed eater. He just collected. He'd get it all on his side of the table, and I saw him bargain with people with their own stuff and give it back to them.
Right.
It was the most incredible thing ever. It's like you just negotiated with those people, and everything that they wanted was in their house when you walked in, and you took it all away from them, and then you gave it back to them as some kind of reward or negotiation. And I couldn't believe it. The other thing, I also have another friend whose negotiating tactic, and you can count on it, is it's every time. It's when he asks what's your price, no matter what they say, he does the teeth suck. Why so much? It's predictable every single time, and I'm amazed at how often people come off a price just because you ask, and sometimes not pennies. Is that the best? Sometimes you're sitting at a house offer at $150,000. He says, "Is that the best you can do?" And the guy said, "Well, no, I could probably do like 140 or $10,000 is not chump change."
Well, so the interesting thing as you tell the real estate stories, which are real life examples, is when someone lists a home for a particular price, that's their opening negotiating position, not their desired outcome. So the gentleman you referred to who flinched, you can either look over your reading glasses, set your reading glasses down. If you're having a conversation over the phone, you can simply pause and say, wow, that's high compared to the comps in the area, or it seems high compared to the comp houses in the area. Why so much? Do you have any flexibility on pricing? Most inexperienced negotiators will cave off a significant portion of their range. So that guy who made the move from 150 to 140 lopped off $10,000 of margin with one request. Most inexperienced negotiators will do the same thing. And when I'm teaching salespeople how to do that, when they're dealing with major accounts such as Walmart, Target, Lowe's, Home Depot, if pressure is put on the seller about price, an inexperienced negotiator will generally move off of their range very quickly, and they'll generally move off their range deeply. So I teach people, don't make your first concession so deep. Try to bracket your concessions when you're moving down, especially when you're selling real estate, if you're the seller.
Yeah, I've watched some really good negotiators when they're asked that question, or they're countered. They might be countered with a price $20,000 less than what they're asking price, and they'll come back like taking $1,000 off, you know?
Yeah, so the next tip that I want to share with your listeners is your first concession off of your opening position should be moderate in nature. In other words, if you go from 150 to 149, $149,000, generally speaking, you will piss off the other party in the negotiation, and it'll head towards an impasse. So if you've got a range in which to negotiate, we encourage the first concession to be moderate in size, meaning that the other party will get engaged. So don't nickel and dime them on the first concession, and don't make the concessions in equal increments. So if the house was 150 and my goal was 138, if I wanted to sell it, I would probably go and say, listen, Mitch, there's some flexibility I've got, not a lot, but if we can make this deal work, I think I can let this property go for 146,995. So there's two other pieces of advice for everybody. Don't make your concessions in equal increments. Don't go 1,000, 1,000, 1,000, 1,000, and try to eliminate making concessions with zeros beside them. So don't go 5,000, 10,000, 15,000, 20,000. Try to change the sequence and how you make them.
Very good, very good.
Because if I give you $2,000 and then you go away for a coffee and come back and I give you another $2,000, then you're going to go away for a coffee again and expect another $2,000. I've done nothing to disrupt the pattern in how someone makes a concession. So this has worked for me in all of my real estate transactions and for the real estate people that we teach. Always use odd numbers, and I know some people think that's silly, but if you watch all of the real estate shows that are out there on HGTV, you know, you'll always listen and watch some of the crazy price points that people come up with. But there's plausibility to odd numbers, so I try to tell people stay away from zeros and don't make your concessions in equal increments. Very
good, very good. What is some of the other negotiating techniques that we are maybe not aware of that we should be using?
Well, you brought up one earlier, which is we call it broadening the scope of the negotiation. So if there's no flexibility on price, Mitch, and there's not going to be a price-based negotiation, then try to make sure in your negotiation preparation and planning that you think about some other things that you may want. In other words, if there's no deal on price or movement on price, but you still want the property, then you need to think about a closing date. You need to think about enhancements. You need to think about the potential of waiving some conditions, possibly. We find that people generally lack creativity because they believe negotiation is only about price. So the first one is try to broaden the scope in negotiation. So when I recently sold a home and moved into a condominium, I got the seller of the condominium to do a variety of things. We agreed to an extended closing date for no penalty. We agreed to include some items that were in the condominium. There was she allowed me to actually move in and do some things prior to the closing date, which people think is like crazy. But that relationship was built on trust. And the other thing I would say to people that we see a lot of is, please, your listeners should really take their time to plan and prepare before a negotiation. We find that I use the word lazy. Some people don't like that, but it is what it is. We find that regardless of what you're doing in life, when people don't want to put in the work, they generally lose on the negotiation. The rule of thumb is the person that's most prepared optimizes their outcome. So plan and prepare, do your research as much as you possibly can in the time frame that you've got.
So a lot of different things I want to ask. I've recognized a negotiating tactic that my partner uses that's very effective. You know, the price might be 150. I'm just going to keep going back to that example because it's an easy number. It might be 150,000. He's got them down to 140, and then at the very end or towards the end, he'll say, "Look, if we could get this down to 135, I'll pay all the closing costs." Well, the closing costs were very minimal, and $5,000. I mean, it's way out of balance, you know. But they say yes to it. I mean, he uses that like as if he's giving back some or trying to cooperate.
Right.
Do they have a formal term for that in your world?
Yeah, well, you're giving me some fantastic examples of real world situations. We call that the trade-off gambit. And
Trade-off.
gambit, right? So the trade-off gambit, and a gambit it's a chess term. It's a chess parlance for called maneuver for advantage. So a gambit is the movement of a chess piece on the board, and a counter gambit is what you would do with with the other party. So if I were teaching the seller of that home, when your partner said, listen, I think I can make this deal work. If you can bring it down to 135, I'll cover all the closing costs. Now, if I were the seller, I would say to your partner, let's hypothetically say his name was Bob. Bob, you and I both know that those closing costs are around $850. You just asked me for a $5,000 concession for an $850 trade-off. That's just not going to work. Yes. So you have to be prepared to understand what are the basic closing costs associated with the type and the dollar value of the concession that the other party's made. So that's specifically called the trade-off gambit.
Wow. I was at a seminar, a symposium this weekend, and the guy was talking about purchasing notes, but it applied directly to purchasing houses, or really maybe a whole bunch of things. But I always am relating, and a lot of the listeners I have on here, we're kind of tied into real estate, so I'll keep kind of referring to the real estate transactions, if you don't mind. When people ask or stiff on their price, and their price is the market price or the going rate, we as investors have a tendency to walk away from that because, well, there's no discount there. I can't make any money. And what this guy on stage was teaching us, and by the way, his name was Eddie Speed, and he gave a fantastic presentation. I mean, it was great. He said, if the price of the house is $200,000, if that's what the comps and everything say it's worth, if that's its true value, give or take a couple of dollars, he said, I can pay $1 million for that house if I can win on the terms. So you say, well, how can you pay $1 million for a house if it's only worth 200 and come out on it? And it's just real easy. You just say, I can't make my first payment for 30 years, and by then I'm dead. You know? Right. So you can pay almost any price if you're allowed to write the terms of the deal. So he's gone into this stuff, and he's also talked about writing air notes, which was his example was the price was $260 or $280. They wanted $260. That was as little as they were going to go. He said, they were trying to get it down around $235. They couldn't. He said, look, I can do $200, and I can owe you the other $60,000. No payments, no interest for 3 years. They took the deal. Now, the one thing that a note buyer knows, or that a note guy knows, or that a house guy like me who sells houses on terms, is that probably before that 3 years is up, and especially if you keep reminding them that there's some cash over here. If you ever need some more cash, call me, because that air note's never going to get paid. It's going to get discounted. The next time they have a circumstance and they want some cash and they want it early, they're going to probably discount that note. And that's why he calls them air notes, because he says most of the time these notes that I owe these people, I never have to deal with them because they get negotiated away sometime between now and the 20 years that I'm supposed to make my payments over. So right. I'm with you on there's more to a negotiation than the price. So I think part of the study that you talk about is what are all the things, try to put together the things that you could negotiate on right. that are not price.
And so we teach, just get a piece of paper, and it's surprisingly, it shocks me how people struggle with the idea of simple preparations. Go for a coffee or go for lunch and mark down all of the things that are desirable that don't have anything to do with price. My own example for your listeners, when I bought the condominium, I had trouble selling my primary residence, and that was a problem. And I had made arrangements with her believing, that I was going to need some flexibility on closing date. She gave me 6 months to close the sale on an expensive primary residence prior to closing on the condominium. But what we had agreed to was we had agreed to a progressive scale that at the fourth, fifth, and sixth month, I would start to pay some of her overheads for, taxes and heat to keep the place going. So for me, $600 or $700 a month to close on an $800,000 home was insignificant compared to the value of getting 90 extra days to sell a premium priced home. It was a phenomenal negotiation, but it took work, and you have to sit down and say, what's important to me?
Yeah. So do you buy a lot of real estate yourself, Mike?
No, I wish I would have bought more when I was younger, but I don't. I have some family members that are into investment houses, apartments. I have a relative that's a hard money lender in Boston who lends money to home flippers, which has turned out to be a very lucrative business. And that's interesting to walk through the negotiations on that in terms of what his term, as you say, what the terms are for the people that are flipping homes, and how degrees of negotiation come into play and all those kinds of things. It's rather fascinating. I live in Canada, so the real estate market here is extremely high priced. So it's very difficult to participate as an investor here to either flip homes and or rent them and make money. And also, this is a jurisdiction with strong rent control, so it's tough. It's tough to make money in real estate.
You would have to do it from afar somewhere, huh?
Yeah, I mean that's what's going on in Toronto and Vancouver and everywhere. Is that's all offshore Asian money that owns a large majority of rental income properties in those large centers.
Yeah. So what is your primary source of income? What's your primary goal every day?
Well, we teach a negotiating coach. We teach. My primary source of income is we do presentations, seminars, learning shops, and coaching services on negotiating. So we do presentations for associations. We do presentations, seminars, and workshops for corporations. And we also do one-on-one coaching. We're moving to an online program as well. And I also do consulting work in the area of negotiations as well, primarily on the procurement, both on the procurement and the selling side. So we'll go in and work with a sales team, for example, who's selling a particular product to Home Depot, and we'll also work in healthcare in the U.S. for hospitals or healthcare institutions that are looking to lower costs.
Wow. Do you have you ever helped anybody with scripts?
All the time, and in fact, our one of my audio programs, it was funny that what happens in all of the programs is people always say at the end of them, do you have anything that you can give me that recites all of the scripts that you've used during the time with us today? So I ended up, people didn't even want to listen to the full audio program. So what I did was I did this greatest hits thing, which I have all the questions on it, which is, under what circumstances would you do this? Under what circumstances would do this? So I have all the Gambit and counter Gambit scripts, which are critically important. They're actually more important than the strategies in some situations. I think too many people that write books on negotiating or teach negotiation get caught up in, they're very strategy heavy, which is very difficult to work in a fast-paced, quick negotiation. You have to be ready to be able to say to somebody, like the gentleman that kept, as you say, breathing through his teeth, that we call that a flinch. And that's whether you tip your glasses, you show a sign of agitation, you put your pen down and stop writing, or that gentleman that made that facial expression. We have a script for how to deal with somebody who continually does the flinch maneuver. So there's a lot of things that people need to learn that are script driven.
Wow. You've got my curiosity out the roof now. Do you ever, how important is it that you code the person that you're talking to? Do you ever do that? Do you code, you've heard yellow, greens, blues, and reds?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the other side of our business is sort of forensic selling, and I won't get into that because it's complicated. But as part of negotiating, there are 4 different personality types, Mitch. There's an actual assessment that a person can take. So here are the 4 different personality types: pragmatic, analytical, extroverted, amiable. So we absolutely encourage people to understand themselves and B, to look for signals of what personality type the other party may be. So, for example, if I were to go into a home, and I were in real estate for, let's say I'm one of your listeners, and I go to evaluate a home, I can pretty much tell by what's in the garage and what's on the refrigerator. If I see artwork of a child with fridge magnets on a refrigerator, and I see a lot of sort of personal family representation of possessions in the home, I generally know the person will be amiable. If I see sports equipment in the garage, I'll generally know they're extroverted. If someone is very neat and meticulous in terms of how they keep their home, if they've got, like, say, a pegboard rack of tools in their garage and everything is all hung up neatly, generally that person will be analytical. So it's very important to understand the personality type and the negotiating style of the person you're negotiating with.
What is pragmatic?
Pragmatics are doers. They're very decisive. They size up a situation. They do not like to waste their time, and they get along least well with amiables, who they believe are too soft and not detail-oriented enough. So pragmatics like to get in. They size up a deal. They want it over with quickly. They don't like delays. They have a their attention span is somewhat limited because they really want to move forward quickly. And it's very easy. I should say it's very easy. With some practice, you can start to diagnose people. For example, I can look at someone's screensaver on their laptop, and if they've got a picture of Hawaii or their family on vacation in a beach somewhere, it generally, and I say generally it means they're amiable. And I pick up on those. So I teach people who, don't reveal information about yourself. If you have an open house, remove things that could cause a skilled negotiator to analyze who you are and then who can capitalize on that. Same thing as expensive jewelry. I mean, don't wear expensive things to a negotiation. It's stupid. People do it all the time, though.
Yeah.
We have something that's called dumb is smart, which we tell people don't come across as a sharp, slick, sophisticated negotiator. It doesn't help you at all. And don't argue either. It just intensifies people's desire to prove themselves right. Even in your personal relationships at home, I simply say, this is a problem. What would you like to do to resolve it? I tend not to argue because it doesn't go anywhere.
I saw a tactic the other day. They were talking about, it's very hot here right now. It's like 102, 103 sometimes, most of the days around here right now. And they brought the person that they wanted to buy the house from, they brought them outside. Let's talk about this outside. They took them outside where it was burning up hot and saying that they wanted them to get uncomfortable and hurry up and make a decision.
Well, listen, there's lots of intentional strategies. Some people believe they're, some people say, well, is it unethical to take let's say you ran a manufacturing plant and you had a reception area, and let's say your purchasing people brought the sellers into a room. We would teach people to, we've taught people to do this. Some people go, oh my God, that's a shrewd tactic. But we generally lower the chairs of the sellers in the room so that they sit lower than the procurement people. You never have the room at a comfortable temperature. It's a mistake to have that. And I applaud someone to take someone outside, unless, of course, it booby-trapped the deal and someone said, oh my God, it's so hot, I don't like the exposure of the backyard of this home. I can't imagine spending, summers in this kind of heat or something, with this exposure to the backyard. So that's when it can backfire on you. But you should do things, I encourage people, if you're not a morning person, don't negotiate in the morning. If you find out that the person you're negotiating with is not a morning person, get them to meet you in the morning. If someone is tired at 4:30 in the afternoon, or they're anxious to go somewhere, play golf or do something, call a meeting late in the afternoon. People are most likely to make concessions when they're uncomfortable.
That was the theory that they said, that people would negotiate different if they were uncomfortable, and
Correct.
They thought it is in their favor. Now, there's negotiations for money and for price but there's also other critical negotiations. A lot of times dealing with life and death. Are you ever sought out by professionals who have to negotiate for life and death? Like I just was reading part of a book, I didn't get all the way through of it, called Never Split the Difference. They were negotiating for hostages. They couldn't, you can't get half a guy back. You know, you have to get the whole guy back. You know, it's no good to get part of him back. So
yeah, I'm familiar with the gentleman that wrote the book. I believe he was an FBI hostage negotiator, and then wrote a book, you know, that said negotiate, you know, like your life depends on it. And while I respect everybody's written material and content, there's something that's really important that I think that your listeners are be aware of, which is when I take, I guess I question some people's strategies or their theme for how they write certain books. In a negotiation, there's something called situational power. And that means that if the other party has all of the situation power over you, there is not going to be negotiation, Mitch. So people need to understand that if there's only one home in that area that's for sale and that's the home you want, or it's a seller, or it's a buyer's market, then buyers have situational power. So it's very important that people understand that no matter who they're listening to teach them negotiating skills, if the first assessment is that the other party has situational powers, and it happens all the time in pro sports. If you're after a free agent and there's 7 teams that want him, then the chances are the free agent has situational power. But in terms of life and death situations, no, I haven't been a hostage negotiator, and I haven't taught police forces how to do that. But I get a lot of questions about whether or not people would negotiate over health care. So if someone's facing cancer treatment and their treatment is not covered by their insurance, and the family is faced with these crazy expenses to seek treatment, the question is, are healthcare expenses negotiable? Well, if you have cancer and you wish to continue to live, then you're probably going to have to learn to negotiate, or you're going to go bankrupt in those situations. So I ask people all the time, would you negotiate on laser eye surgery? Would you negotiate for all kinds of things? And the answer is, generally speaking, remember one thing: when somebody gives you a price, it's their price. I simply teach people, listen, I'm not covered by health insurance to this degree. Do you have any flexibility on pricing? Do you offer any flexibility on no charge payment programs to get this done? And it's amazing what will end up happening. So I encourage people again, the problem is it's the same thing as weddings. People always come to me and say, should I negotiate on the costs associated with a wedding? Well, in a highly emotional situation, someone says, well, I feel cheap if I try to negotiate with the venue for my daughter's wedding. But the reality is, if you have a significant cost structure for a wedding, you should absolutely be negotiating with everybody on everything.
Wow. I had a situation several years ago where we all wanted to go to Cozumel. And one of my friends, who's just a killer negotiator, I think he is, I've always admired him. He's almost like too much sometimes. It's like, okay, stop negotiating with a taxi guy. We need to just get where we're going. Give him the extra,
right.
You know. But this example we had, he said, let's get online. Let's find the most expensive house on the beach. The most expensive houses. So we found these companies that lease these houses. And he said, we picked out like the 5 most expensive houses. And they were beautiful with pools and unbelievable houses. And he said, okay, let's go during the off season. If you want the deal, we'll go during the off season. He said, we'll buy our tickets now, but we won't start negotiating for which house we're going to stay at till 10 days before we're going to get there in the off season. So 10 days. So then when we got about to be about 10 days before the trip, we called this management company who said, how many of these houses do you own yourself? Does the owner of this company own? And he says, well, he owns these 4. And then we picked the most expensive 4, and we said, you know, we're going to be there. And is this one available during this time? And they said, yeah, it was only 10 days away. And then we said, well, you know, we really like that house. We can't pay $10,000 for the week for that house, but we do have $3,000, and may we add that we're all adults, we're not partying, we will not tear this house down. It'll probably be left cleaner than it was when we got there. And if you'll take that, and they they take it. We've done it 3 times. It happened. It's kind of nerve-wracking to try to not know where you're going till 10 days before. It's really nerve-wracking for some people like me. I don't care. I'm going to stay somewhere whether I get the house or not. I'm going to go there. I'm just going to work out. But I find that kind of pressure too, waiting.
Right.
Like if you don't rent it now, it's not going to be rented. You know,
so to formalize what that's called, we call it time pressure. And 80% of the concessions come down to the last 20% of time left, Mitch. So so first of all, let's retract that story about Cozumel or Cabos, or whether it's Cancun or Tulum or wherever you're going. It's the same situation. So first of all, you use time pressure in reverse. You found out that there is some availability. You find out that the property management company has 3 homes that you would like to lease or rent for the week. And the interesting part of that is you use the time pressure to your advantage. And the other thing that you need to always, and the listeners need to think about, is that property management company has pressure to meet bills and deadlines. So $3,000 is as important to them 10 days before they were going to have to leave the place empty. And people don't think about that. People need to think about the fact, well, what pressure is this property management company under? Well, they probably got to pay people to clean it. They probably got to pay, they've got overheads that they need to manage the property. And you come along and say, listen, I really can't afford $10,000. I would teach you to say, listen, we've taken a look at the family budget, and we think we can come up with $3,795 US. Now, when you start throwing out the zeros again, that's a problem, because I think, well, the guy said 3, I'll bump him to 8, and we'll bracket at 6 is where we'll end up. But if you say to me, listen, I've talked to the other people who are staying with, we've taken a look at the family budget, we think we can come up with $37,995 for the lease payment. Would that work for you? And that person who says it's 10 days out, I'm going to take the revenue. And if you bracket it, again, you just have to decide between $10,000 and $3,000, sort of where you want to be. I think you have to be careful that if you bracket too low on their asking price, they get insulted, and some people will hang up the phone and do whatever. So we call it maximum plausible position, Mitch, which means whatever you offer the other party, you can't go in a home, I don't care how disgusting it might look, you can't go in for a home that's listed at $150,000 and say, oh my God, this place is a mess and it's in a terrible neighborhood, I'll give you $75,000, unless of course it's some crazy fire sale. So you have to be careful to make sure that everything is based on maximum plausible position. But time pressure, same thing, I tell everybody when they buy a car, don't go in at the beginning of the month. Go in at the end of the month at 8:45 p.m. at the end of a quarter. Guaranteed Toyota, Honda, GM, Chrysler will have incentive programs. The dealership will have incentive programs. There's a tote board in the back room where every rep will know how many units they've moved off the lot. Do your research before you go. Go in at the end of the month, the end of the quarter, Friday night at 8:45, and be prepared to negotiate. And the outcome will be significant.
I've sold cars, and you're exactly right. They're always trying to get those last few sales in before the books close out.
Right.
Man, I had when we were talking about that Cozumel thing, we had like 8 management companies already figured out in case we made someone mad, or in case we weren't just going to try this once with one management company, because some management company might have had a different attitude about it and told us to go jump off a cliff or something. So also in that time frame, do you have a name? I'd like to see all the categories of the different negotiating techniques that they have. How many are there? Have you counted?
Yeah, there's so on the Gambit side of it, so there's a methodology that people need to learn. And the first one is learn to plan and prepare. Then there's the 3 stages of every negotiation. Then there's time pressure, information power, and personal power. And then there's really around 15 gambits and corresponding counter gambits, Mitch. And that's everything from asking for more than you expect to get. Now, a lot of the current writers and seminar people that teach negotiating skills call many of these sort of tricks, which I take offense to, because to me, they're strategies that legitimately work. So you just mentioned one of them, which is called, alternative. So you said we had 4 different management companies. Well, you're not going to try a negotiation to move somebody from $10,000 to $3,000 a week if you don't have a backup. Now, if the backup is a hotel, the backup could be a hostel, and you could be backpacking. I don't care what your choices are, but you have to go into that saying, well, we have 4 property management companies who lease or rent space on beaches that have these types of homes, and you're going to work all 3, but you had alternatives. So there's approximately 15 gambits and corresponding gambits. But once you get the recipe and the formula right, Mitch, once you get the recipe and the formula right, it works in your personal, social, and your business life like clockwork. And I use the same 9 gambits religiously in my life. I'm always ready for, like what we call the positioning for easy acceptance gambit, which is when I sold my home, I didn't have to include my snowblower, my lawnmower, and my garden tools, but I wasn't going to use them. So for me to put them on Kijiji or sell them for a few $100s, I mean, what was the point of that? So I said, listen, you and your wife seem like great people, and your children, this is a really great home. And here's what I'd like to do. I'll include the lawnmower, all of the garden tools, the snowblower, and these things as part of the deal. And the people said, oh, you do that for me? Now, neither the real estate agents, my real estate agent, and their real estate agent never asked for any of those things. So, but it was my decision to include them because we call that positioning for easy acceptance. And that means the other party goes away and says, wow, Michael Shloopka, the negotiating guy, gave us these things without even asking for them.
What a great guy.
What a great guy.
Hey, so you were talking about making lowball offers, say like the house is 150 and you can't just walk.
Dangerous.
You can't just walk in and offer 75. I was just thinking about that. Let me restate that. So everything that you do, whether it's real estate or not real estate, needs to be based on maximum plausible position. In other words, if you want an extended stay in a Las Vegas hotel because you have a late flight, you're not going to be able to say, can I check out at 7 p.m.? That's ridiculous when the checkout time is 12 noon. The best you're going to be able to get is 2 to 3 because they need to clean the room and check-in is at 4. So I'll let you continue with your comment, but I tend to formalize terms called maximum plausible position. And we get a lot of people, especially men, who have this really nasty habit of going in and they thinking negotiating is about lowball. And it's not about lowball. It's determining what you believe you can offer the other side, and they still see plausibility to it. Yes. So
I took you off your train of thought. I'm sorry.
No. That was good. I'm thinking about what you're saying. So how would you negotiate for a 7 o'clock check-in?
Well, it's for 7 p.m. Here's the way I would go, and it happens to me when I travel the world, especially if I'm in a nice place and I have a late flight and I'm enjoying myself. I will go to the front desk, and if I'm part of a large association who's staying at that property, let's use Las Vegas as an example, and let's say they've got 300 room nights booked for the people attending the convention, I will go down to the front desk and say, who has the authority to extend a late checkout? And the person will say, that would be my front desk manager. And I will say, may I speak to him or her? That person will come over and I will say, hi, I am with X group. So the moment that person hears I'm with the Ford Motor Company, for example, that person automatically knows that the Ford Motor Company has X amount of room nights equals X amount of revenue. The last thing they want me to do is to go to the meeting planner and go, I had a terrible experience with the front desk. And I'll simply say, listen, I've got a late flight. What's the latest you can grant me in terms of a checkout time without charging me an incremental fee? And I stop talking. And that person will say, Mr. Shloopka, our standard checkout time is 12 noon. The hotel is in a sold out position. We really do need to stick our checkout time. And the counter gambit of that today is, so you're telling me there is no flexibility whatsoever in your checkout time? And if they say no, then I say, listen, if you mind, I'll go and speak to the people at the Ford Motor Company and see if they can get one granted. What I try to do most of the time is Most people will give me, if the published checkout time is 12 noon, I will get to between 3 and 4 without paying for any surcharge associated with staying in the room. I also ask hotels all the time, what are their occupancy rates? How full are they? Because if a front desk person says, we're about 70% capacity, we were really busy last week, but we're not so busy this week. When hotels aren't full and when airlines aren't full, they've got flexibility. I have never checked out of a hotel room in 27 years at 12 noon, ever. Ever.
So you're making me think of things that I've witnessed. I was in line one time at a very expensive hotel, and I knew a couple of people ahead of me in the line, and there was two men, and they started talking about flight plans, airports, turnarounds, layovers, all kinds of, like, as if they were pilots. Pilots. They weren't dressed in pilot. They were dressed normal, and the person was waiting on someone ahead of them, but they had kind of moved up, and they were talking about pilots, and I kept thinking, I never knew these guys flew. And so later on that night, I said, hey, I was in that line, and I heard you talking to Frank over there about layovers and junkets and all kinds of. I didn't know you were a pilot. He says, oh, I'm not a pilot. They just give pilots like half off at this hotel. And I figured if they heard us talking pilot language, they would assume that we were pilots, and they would give us the American Airlines rate. And I said, did it work? He says, oh yeah, when I never even asked for the airline thing, they just gave it to me.
Yeah, it's amazing. Somebody might say to me, are you a member of, the American Automobile Association or the Canadian Automobile Association? Are you a member of the Canadian Professional Sales Association? I'll simply say, well, I was. And they say, okay, we can extend you this discount. I mean, it's just amazing what will happen if you try hard enough. I generally, when I do check in, I verify my room rate. I verify and do research on it, and it's so important that people invest the time. And then again, without being silly about stuff. I mean, that's the other thing that you have to have a goal. You have to have an objective. You have to be professional and fair about what you do. But a negotiated dollar is a bottom line dollar, and we just don't see enough people in our travels that are consciously competent at negotiating. There's a lot of people that are unconsciously competent, which means that they don't know that they know. And what we attempt to do is to formalize the methodology with people to get it out of lucky to being predictable.
Yeah, if you think, if you just got 10% off of everything in your life, it'd be worth a mega millions of dollars. You know what I mean? Over your whole career. You're going to be giving away an audio, which is a digital download on this, not CDs or anything, but a digital download. I say not giving away. You're offering the listeners here a discount of about $20. Tell us about what you're offering.
Yeah, thanks, Mitch. I think in order to get, to help people get better at this skill set, we have a full audio learning program, which includes the full learning program and also what I call the greatest hits phrases and scripts, as well as that personality self-assessment I mentioned, so that a person can determine if they're pragmatic, analytical, extroverted, or amiable. The standard price at our online store is $99.95 US. We're giving your listeners a specific $19.95 off of that list price if they go to the website and purchase it. And again, it's an MP3 download. It's instantaneous. You get some instructions to download it into your iMac or a Windows media player, and then it can go onto your phone. We're a big believer in listen and learn, Mitch, versus a book, because books are written in a one-dimensional format, which means, if they're written on the basis of how somebody responds. And my response to that is, well, what if the person responds differently? Well, on audio, we give you the gambits, the counter gambits, and the counter gambits to the way that conversation would flow. So you're able to make sure that you address that. So for all of your listeners, and I think there'll be some information that they have available through your organization about how they can get access to that discount code. and go onto the online store and get their discount.
Yeah, so you just go to reinvestorsummit.com/negotiate and the number one. Negotiate and the number one. Negotiate one. And it's a tremendous asset to have these things at your fingertips and be able to listen to it. I like to double dip, Mike. I like to learn while I'm driving. I get two things done. I've got to spend 45 minutes every day before I leave my house to get to my office or get downtown where my store is. And I use that time to better myself in all different kinds of ways. And you can bet your bottom dollar that I will be taking the time to listen to my own version of this audio learning program, because I really have no doubt if I was to pay the asking price for this, that I will get my value, because it only takes one line said at the right time in the right deal to make tens of thousands of dollars up. And I think you're being very generous to give our people $20 off of what's already a great price and a great value. You know, to learn from a pro all the gambits and counter gambits, to use your terminology, for $100. I mean, it's almost something anyone should do anyways. It's ridiculous not to take that in, because to think that you wouldn't find one nugget in there to save you $1,000 before you die is kind of ridiculous, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the program should pay for itself in your first negotiation, whether it be a credit card company, an institution, or even in a personal setting with a family member, to get a family member to clean up their room or do something, and it'll pay for itself in a heartbeat. And it's studio recorded. It's not some dubbed thing from a live program I did somewhere. So it's all studio recorded. And I think the value that your people will also get of it is we developed the MP3 version of the greatest hits phrases, so that if somebody is in a 40-minute commute and they want to learn all of the key things, then they can listen to that product. And the other thing is they can take the self-assessment too and learn, am I an amiable, am I a pragmatic, am I an analytical? And that'll also help them in their negotiations when they're dealing with other people.
That's really, really important. And I've carried around in my wallet these 4 colored cards, red, blue, green, and yellow, because one time I was trying to negotiate for a house, and I think the listeners will find this easy, and I like your take on it, your assessment of it. We saw this vacant house, and we found the owner of it. We called them, and apparently what had happened was this married couple, had been married a long time, and they had a daughter who had 9 babies, and they didn't know who the fathers were. And they were taking care of their daughter and these 9 babies in different stages of, different years old, of course. And the church, someone at the church had given them a big house. And so they'd moved out of this house. There was nothing wrong with the house. It just was too small for the amount of people that was there. And their church, I don't know exactly how it happened, but they weren't living there anymore. The church had given them a great big house. And I was negotiating for this house for the longest time, and they didn't owe anything on it. And it sat there forever because I couldn't get the guy to make a decision. He just wouldn't sell the house. And I was interviewing someone about coding people, and when I hung up, my phone reminder went off and said, it's time to call that guy again about that house. And it'd been 18 months I'd been trying to get this house. 18 months this house had been sitting vacant, and it hadn't sold. It didn't have a for sale sign in front of it. And I thought to myself, I'm going to code this guy from what I just learned. And so I got out the cards and I was looking at them, or I was reviewing our statement. I said, this guy's blue. This guy is giving, charitable, not money motivated.
Right.
And I called the guy up like I was supposed to on my reminder and said to him, look, I noticed you still have the house for sale. It's still for sale, right? I mean, it's still vacant? He says, yeah, it's still vacant. He goes, I don't know if it's for sale. And I said, look, I got a family that really needs to live in the neighborhood. They got kids, and the parents, live in that neighborhood. They can't really afford to live in that neighborhood, but they can't afford to live where they're at and have to bring the kid all the way back and all. Anyways, long story short, I started talking to them in their language, and I bought the house by 12 noon. It was amazing to me.
Yeah, Mitch, I can't emphasize enough the importance of what you just said. Generally speaking, that person, you call it, to use your terminology, they were coded as blue. We would call them an amiable. And amiables have a high attachment to things and history and the emotions attached to that situation. And if they didn't need the money, you have to. So what we teach people is, I diagnose the behavior of the other party. If I sense they're analytical, I present the numbers. If I assess them as pragmatic, I present them, this can close in 10 days. If they're amiable or extroverted, I will tell them, I have a home, there's children, they will love this backyard. The basement is fantastic for a workout room. You've decorated this thing fantastically. Boy, we'll keep the colors, we'll keep the drapery, we'll keep the wall covering. The last thing you want to do with an amiable person is go into their home and start talking about changing stuff. Shut up about that stuff. And don't say, oh, we'll take out this wall. This kitchen is dated and it looks like shit. Pardon my French. And then the woman somebody sits there and go, oh my God, did you hear what they just said? And the answer is, well, look, I'm not going to sell that house to them. So I spend my life trying to teach people to appeal to the nature of the other party by diagnosing what they are. And that woman that I bought the condominium from, she was a Brazilian Italian female who was just on the tail end of a divorce. So I did not negotiate with her on money because that was her money. She bought that condominium with the proceeds of getting out of an uncomfortable situation. And the last thing I was going to do was diminish the value of that scenario. So that negotiation for the condo, I didn't ask for $1 off of that condominium, not $1. I got extended payment terms and closing. I got the chance to go in numerous times to have a look at what we might want to do with it. But it's so important to read the other part.